delikado rin itong ating mga consumers na dati-dati natatabili sila ng kanilang mga taga magagandang klase ng isda na mura ang halaga, kagaya ng kango, yung mga yabaya, yung mga talakito, nakakabili sila ng magagandang klase ng isda na mura ang halaga. Pero alam nyo ngayon sa sitwasyon namin, unang-una dito sa bayan ng Masidlo, ang mga kababayan natin na nakakaulang sila ng masasarap dahil na mahirap yung kanilang kabuhayan natin, pero tayo kung hindi ka
for the land acknowledgement, followed by the singing of the Philippine national and Canadian national anthems.
We have a story to tell. It's an opportunity for us to share our culture, about who we really are.
Everybody in the world has an Aboriginal past, but they're so far removed from it, from thousands of years of separation.
It is a great responsibility, I believe, to present my culture in the most honest and historically accurate way possible, because I might be the only one that they ever meet.
They need to leave and to say, without them, we would not know Canada as it is today.
They want to beat the drum, they want to dance the dance and feel it in the heart and be able to remember it forever, because once you hear the beat of the drum, you'll never forget it.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Sit down. We would like now to call on Consul General of the Republic of the Philippines in Toronto, the Honorable Angelica C. Escalona, to give her welcome remarks.
Magandang hapon. Good afternoon sa inyong lahat, and thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us here at the Community Forum on the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine Foreign Service postings in Canada, headed by the Philippine Embassy in Ottawa, have realized that many people here in Canada, including our kababayans, the Filipino diaspora, have little or no knowledge about the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. That is, the overlapping claims of states in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, which is that portion of the South China Sea that pertains to the Philippines, which is ours, and why the West Philippine Sea is so very, very important to the Philippines and the rest of the world. To help address this, the Philippine Post in Canada came up with a proposed roadshow, which was fortunately approved by the Department of Foreign Affairs, for Filipino experts to speak to Canadian audiences on the West Philippine Sea. So on September 18, our Filipino experts spoke before MPs and politicians in Ottawa. Yesterday, they spoke before a meeting, a congress of Filipino leaders from across Canada that was held in Winnipeg. And Toronto is the last leg. We are very pleased to bring this discussion to you today. You might ask, ano naman ang relevant sa akin ng South China Sea at West Philippine Sea? Layo-layo ko naman, nandito ako sa Canada. Diba? But listen closely to these presentations and you will find out. I don't want to give any spoilers, but what I can say is this. The audiences in Ottawa and in Winnipeg, they said that these presentations of our experts, they're eye-openers. And I can guarantee that they will inspire you to act. For act, you must. As our speaker, Dr. Deo Onda, said in Winnipeg yesterday, nakita, the more you know, the more you care. And the more you care, the more you will act. Let me share with you a personal story. A few weeks ago, I heard in the news that Chinese vessels ran the Philippine Coast Guard vessel BRP Teresa Magbanua, barko ng Republika ng Pilipinas. You know, in 2022, when I was studying in Indonesia, I had the honor of boarding that vessel that was there at that time for marine pollution exercises with Japan and Indonesia. This is a Coast Guard vessel. You know what I felt when I heard the news? Atin-atin na lang. Actually, I felt indignant. I felt violated. Not just for the crew of this great vessel. And you know what? BRP Teresa Magbanua, I'm very proud that they have Filipina officers in their crew. So I felt not just for the crew, but for the entire Filipino nation. So this actually inspires me to do my very best to protect Philippine interests in the West Philippine Sea for the present and future generations. And so with that, I wish to thank the DFA, Department of Foreign Affairs, particularly our Maritime and Ocean Affairs Office, the Philippine Embassy in Ottawa, who had the idea to have this roadshow, our speakers, Attorney J. Batong-Bakal and Dr. Deo Onda, our partner here, the University of the Philippines Alumni Association in Toronto, our actors, Professor Philip Kelly and Ms. Olivia Camacho, and all of you for joining us here today. Maraming salamat at mabuhay ang Pilipinas.
Maraming pong salamat, Consul General Escalona. Before we go to our main speaker for today, save the best for last. We will first show a video recording of one of the eminent maritime experts in the Philippines, especially on the West Philippine Sea. I think you know him already, as mentioned by Consul General, Attorney J. Batong-Bakal. He was in Winnipeg yesterday, but unfortunately he has another speaking engagement. But he was very kind enough to give us a video recording of his presentation. So please. Okay.
The West Philippine Sea Overview and Importance. In this video lecture, we briefly discuss the significance of the West Philippine Sea in its natural physical context as part of the broader South China Sea, a large marine ecosystem that hosts numerous natural resources and resource uses that make it the convergence point of national and international interests. But before anything else, we must make distinctions between the terms South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. This is necessary for us to be able to identify the Philippines' specific national interests within this marine region, separate them from the international community's more general interests, and understand where these interests either converge or diverge. Clarification of the terminology will also help us in communicating our positions and interests to the international community more accurately. We begin with the term South China Sea. The South China Sea is a historical and cartographic designation. The use of the term does not attribute any particular rights nor recognize ownership in favor of China. Geographically, the term refers to a large body of water bounded by 6 littoral states, namely the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Vietnam, and China, and 2 other sea areas, the Gulf of Thailand and the Java Sea. It is designated by the International Hydrographic Organization as Sea Area Number 71, and encompasses a large surface area of more than 3.1 million square kilometers. The South China Sea can reach depths of about 4,000 meters, but a large area of about 1.88 million square kilometers is only around 200 meters deep. These shallower areas comprise the continental and insular shelves of the surrounding land masses, forming extensions of their coasts. And these host rich marine resources that have been historically exploited by the adjacent coastal states. The West Philippine Sea is distinct from the South China Sea. The use of the term West Philippine Sea is directed by Administrative Order No. 29, CVSO 2012. Since this is an administrative order, the naming of the West Philippine Sea binds only the Philippines and can be applicable to or enforceable upon government personnel, offices, and areas under the jurisdiction of the Philippines. The act of naming is expressly described to be without prejudice to the determination of the maritime domain of the Philippines territories, hence it applies only to our sea areas, not to land territories. The West Philippine Sea is to be understood as a means of officially and conveniently referring to the maritime areas over which the Philippines has sovereign rights and jurisdictions under international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It refers to the maritime areas on the western side of the Philippine archipelago, which includes the Luzon Sea and the waters around, within, and adjacent to the Calang Island Group and Bao de Masinloc, also known as Harbor Shoal. As such, the term West Philippine Sea refers principally to our 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and continental shelf, and the territorial seas adjacent to parts of the land territories located outside of those 200 nautical mile zones. So within these areas, there are numerous living and non-living marine resources and significant human activities that utilize them. The West Philippine Sea being part of the South China Sea, a considerable proportion of these resources and resource uses properly pertain to the Philippines as well. Of these resources, fisheries and marine biodiversity are the most important. The South China Sea and West Philippine Sea have been blessed with rich biodiversity and fishery resources on account of wide, shallow shelf areas, seamounts, and diverse tropical ecosystems that have nurtured rich marine habitats and diverse fisheries. Its ecosystem health and sustainability serves the interests of many nations across the region. The coastal communities of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia have historically relied on these waters for sustenance and livelihoods. Historically, the Philippines has exploited only a relatively small portion of its marine resources in the EEZ. The small and medium-scale commercial fishing industry in particular relies largely on traditional wooden outrigger boats and fishing gear, which restrain the sector from overexploiting the fisheries due to relative inefficiency. Of the total reported marine catch in the South China Sea, which reached more than 10.5 million metric tons in 2018, we only caught about 380,000 metric tons, or less than 10% of what China caught in the same period. But these 380,000 metric tons contribute more than 25% of the country's commercial fisheries production. The southern portion of the West Philippine Sea, the area of the Kalayaan Group, is thought to be home to 1.94 million metric tons of valuable commercial species like tuna, purple-back squid, bonitos, and travaliers, and may produce up to 91,000 metric tons of fish annually. This would be enough to feed up to 2.3 million Filipinos, underscoring the importance of access to the West Philippine Sea for purposes of food security. The fisheries are made abundant by coral reef ecosystems in the West Philippine Sea, of which the Kalayaan Island Group accounts for some 30%. About 500 species of coral reef fish, a significant number of which are important food fishes, are sustained by these precious habitats. On account of the exchange of seawater due to currents, waves, and tides, there is also a continuous exchange of biological material across the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea with other sea areas. Genetic markers reveal the interconnection between the species in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea and those in the Sulu Sea, which in turn connect with the Celebes and onward further into Indonesian and Pacific waters. The interconnection of habitats and species are vital to their regenerative capacity. The sustainability of marine habitats and fishery resources are integrally linked across vast distances. Whatever happens in the marine ecosystems in the South China Sea, therefore, will affect the marine ecosystems in the Sulu Sea and other Philippine inter-island waters. Hence, the Philippines' keen interest in ensuring environmental sustainability in the West Philippine Sea. In addition, huge oil and gas reserves are thought to be waiting to be found in the shallower shelf areas along the mainland coast of the surrounding states. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that, based on available exploration data, as much as 11.2 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas remain to be tapped in the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. In some places, exploitation is already in full swing, fueling the steadily growing economies of Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These Southeast Asian countries developed their reserves well ahead of other littoral states. The Philippines, unfortunately, has yet to truly take advantage of its petroleum prospects, owing to its very slow rate of petroleum exploration activities, averaging about just 1/10 of that of its neighbors before 2010. With respect to energy, the Philippines' interest in the West Philippine Sea was sparked in the late 1960s on account of the initial reports of petroleum potentials there. Since the 1970s, we have conducted offshore exploration, but none have attracted more attention than the shallow shelf areas of the West Philippine Sea. The geology of the seabed and shelf areas west of Palawan is a mirror of the seabed and shelf areas off the petroleum-rich coasts of Vietnam, Indonesia, and China. Thus, they are expected to similarly host major petroleum reserves. The discoveries of the Marampaya and Sampaguita gas fields and the Gallup oil field further strengthen these assessments. The West Philippine Sea remains our most promising petroleum province and holds the key to our future indigenous petroleum energy supplies and long-term energy security. Since ancient times, the South China Sea has enabled seaborne trade in goods and the migration of peoples. Maritime trade remains by far the most important resource used, imbuing it with truly seaborne trade passes through this area at present, worth anywhere from 3.3 to 5.3 trillion US dollars. Beyond the Southeast Asian region, throughout East Asia, Australia, and the Pacific, these sea lines of communication form a central node for the global network of maritime trading routes that are at the foundation of the global economy. External powers like Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, the EU, and the United States are deeply invested in access through this sea region. Similarly, air routes traverse the South China Sea with flight paths crisscrossing the airspace closer to the Asian mainland and coasts. The freedom of overflight through international airspace ensures the ability of civil aviation to peacefully traverse the region and reinforces the region's economic and social connectivity. When it comes to marine and air transportation, the Philippines' interests rank even higher than that of other members of the international community, whether regional or extra-regional states. The Philippines' trade connectivity to the Asian mainland is dependent on its maritime trade routes. Freedom of navigation guaranteed under the law of the sea enables its maritime connectivity with the Asian mainland and beyond. Each day, hundreds of ships pass through the West Philippine Sea, with some of them calling at Philippine ports to convey or take on goods. Freedoms of the air under international air law allows airborne passenger and cargo connectivity to destinations in Asia and Europe through the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea. It is clear that without guaranteed and free access through the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea, the Philippines could be cut off from the Eurasian continents. Unrestricted and guaranteed access through the West Philippine Sea and South China Sea are clearly essential for our existence as a truly sovereign and independent nation state. More recently, it has come to the attention of many observers and experts that the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea also now serve as a central hub for data traffic due to numerous fiber optic submarine cables that have been laid through it over the decades. These cables enable high-speed data transmission that is essential for today's internet and global computer communications and information exchange systems. Researchers have only just begun to scratch the surface of the implications of this previously unnoticed latticework of data, which are necessary to make modern economies and international commerce run efficiently. And there are more resources and activities that are still unexplored and untapped in the West Philippine Sea. Mineral resources remain to be found in the seabed, such as manganese nodules and cobalt-rich crusts. Gas hydrates and caltrates, essentially natural gas that has crystallized into blue ice on account of high pressure and cold temperatures in the deep sea, are likely to be present also. And genetic resources of organisms, both known and unknown in the deep sea, have huge potentials. These are resources for the future and would form part of the heritage of future generations of Filipinos. UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, is very important to the Philippines. As an archipelago comprised of land and water, we have intuitively regarded our rights over our seas, both inter-island and offshore, as vital national interests. Today, UNCLOS remains a major pillar in our foreign policy advocacy because of its inherent significance to our nation's life. UNCLOS is widely referred to as the Constitution of the Oceans. It is the common legal framework upon which is based national and international management of the oceans within and beyond national jurisdiction. The document is a product of about 30 years of negotiations, although it is also a codification of hundreds of years of state practice. UNCLOS is one of the achievements of the United Nations mission of progressively developing international law.
As a very young scientist talking about the West Philippine Sea, I'm actually from Palawan. So the issue in the West Philippine Sea is not just a news, it's not just an abstract or political issue for me. It's actually happening within my backyard. I grew up with fisher folks. Kami po, I actually have one kababayan here also from Brooks Point. Kasama kami sa high school. We grew up in a fishing community. And growing up, I've known stories of fisher folks going to the West Philippine Sea. Actually, ang tawag nila dyan sa kabila. Because we live in the Sulu Sea. And then during the fishing season, they would say, mawawala kami ng ilang linggo kasi punta kami sa kabila. It also means going to the West Philippine Sea. However, after my PhD, when I came back from from my postdoc from Germany, napansin ko, I noticed that many of my neighbors who used to go sa kabila don't go there anymore. And they asked them why. Because we're afraid. Because we're scared. So, probably for many, the issue of the West Philippine Sea is just a petty fight between the Philippines and China. But for many Filipinos, it's actually a struggle every day on how they're gonna survive because they have nowhere to go to get food anymore. And those kinds of stories are the stories that we would like to bring back to the table. The lived experiences of the Filipinos who are actually back home. And what you, as part of the Filipino diaspora, can actually do to help them. So, sorry. So my presentation today, Dr. J already gave you a very good overview on our legal claims as well as the political debacle that happens around the West Philippine Sea. But I have two main objectives. One is to remind you that as Filipinos, or at least Filipinos living in Canada, that your roots actually belong to the Philippines, but that root comes with the identity that we are a maritime country. So the title of the presentation is Reimagining Our Roots, Reconnecting with the Seas. Our stake in the West Philippine Sea. Right there. But before I proceed, the reason why I was invited by DFA is a part of this celebration called Manamo. In 2017, President Duterte released an executive order. Actually, this is more asserting again our identity as an archipelagic and maritime nation. So, with that executive order, our presidential proclamation, he designated September as the Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, or Manamo. So, yung moniker niyan is MANA. MANA means inheritance. And it is our inheritance. The archipelagic nature of the Philippines and the maritime country that we live in, or at least we used to live in. So before we proceed, I'd like to join everyone. Let's greet each other. Happy Manamo. Happy Manamo. Right? It's nice to hear na kahit walang laman yung account natin sa bangko, meron tayong pwedeng manahin. Because the Philippines itself is our inheritance. And later, I'd like you to realize that when we talk about inheritance, it's not actually just for Filipinos. It's an inheritance that the Filipinos are giving to the world. And that's why we're here in Canada. We're not actually just talking to you or the Filipino communities. We're also talking to the leadership of Canada. Because we want to have allies. We want to have friends in this fight. I'd like to remind you that as mga taong dagat, ang Pilipinas po is 82% water and only 18% land. 82% water. Gusto ko lang matandaan ninyo, 82% water. Made up of 7,641 islands. Hindi na po high tide or low tide. Definite na po yan. Either high tide or low tide. O, ito ba tao? Alam po anong generation kayo. I did not belong to that generation. I just know the joke. But 7,641 islands. It also means that more than 50% of the population of Filipinos, more than 50% of the provinces and the regions actually lie on the coast. Needless to say, more than 50% of Filipinos back home depend on the bounties of the sea. You cut that access to the sea, you cut to their culture, you cut their access to the very sea that they tried and have lived all their lives with. The sea is also important to the Filipinos because economically, it is contributing to around 7% of our GDP. Pero yun nga yung medyo nakakapagtaka eh. 82% of the waters and yet it's only contributing 7%. Hindi ba liit? Canada is so big, but actually, if you look at the ocean economy of Canada, it's contributing a lot to its GDP. Pero bakit ang Pilipinas, which is made up of 82% water, only contributes, its ocean economy only contributes around 7%. And majority of those come from marine tourism. Yan, El Nido, Boracay.
Pero tandaan natin, when we talk about tourism, it's also dependent on the environment. Ngayon, with what's happening in the West Philippine Sea, how will this be affected? The other important sector that is contributing to the GDP of the ocean economy of the Philippines is fisheries, food. How is this being affected by what's happening in the West Philippine Sea? The other thing that I'd like you to be reminded with, and as part of your identity, and you should be proud of this as Filipinos, we belong in the Coral Reef Triangle. The Coral Reef Triangle is already the area with the highest concentration of corals. Pinakamadaming klase, pinakamadaming uri, the highest species diversity, the highest number of organisms. We belong there. But you know what's so important about the Philippines and the Coral Triangle? It is the epicenter. It is the center of marine biodiversity. We talk about the Coral Triangle, but we talk about the center of the triangle, it's actually the Philippines. We talk about Amazon forest, alam nating lahat, very diverse, kailangang alagaan. But probably many of us do not know. The Philippines is actually the Amazon of the sea. So pag tinanong kayo, taga-saan kayo, I come from the epicenter of marine biodiversity. Dapat ganun yung sagot natin. I live in the Amazon of the sea. Rar. But it's an identity that we need to assert. And we need to actually reclaim that identity. For the longest time, Filipinos have forgotten that we are a maritime country. We always say, no, we are not divided by waters. We are actually connected by it. You go to your provinces, you go to Zamboanga, to Tawi-Tawi, ibang itsura ng bangka. You go to Batanes, you go to Palawan, ibang itsura ng bangka. Why? Because Filipinos have evolved. We've adapted to the seas. Iba-iba ang itsura ng bangka kasi iba-iba ang lakas ng alon, iba-iba ang taas ng alon. That's an adaptation. You know, you go to Visayas, actually we are divided by mountains. Because municipalities that belong to different islands but face each other are more related than municipalities that belong in the same island but are on the other side divided by a mountain. So we are actually connected by the seas rather than divided by it. So, you know, ang saya kayang pakinggan. I belong to the epicenter for marine biodiversity, di ba? But if you look at the Philippines and we talk about the waters, the territory, 40% of that territory belongs to the West Philippine Sea. Dr. Batong Bakal already defined ano ibig sabihin ng West Philippine Sea. Clarify lang po natin hindi natin inaangkin ang buong South China Sea. We are only claiming the rights reserved for us, indicated in UNCLOS, ratified by 60 plus countries. So, it is actually the borders or the area within the 200 nautical mile zone of the Philippines, but 40%. So cut the access of Filipinos to that 40%, what happens to us? And that's actually what's happening in the West Philippine Sea right now. So with this presentation, I'd just like to focus on certain questions. No? One, why is the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea important to Filipinos in the world? It's not just us. Protecting the West Philippine Sea doesn't only protect the interests of the Philippines. It is actually protecting, being at the center of marine biodiversity, it is imperative and a moral obligation for the Philippines to actually protect that diversity for the entire world. Indirectly, if all countries are calling for the protection of the Amazon forest, why wouldn't they call for the protection of the epicenter of marine biodiversity? It's a global, it's a world, it's a human heritage. Second, what are the implications of China's presence in the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea? And then there's a new battleground. Hindi pa tayo tapos sa pakikipaglaban dun sa mga isla at sa mga rocks at sa mga islands. Actually, ang China is already progressing on other dimensions. And we need to be, we need to be cognizant of that so we can prepare. But the most important question is that, what can we do? Ano yung pwede natin gawin? Sometimes ako mismo po, no? I watch the news, parang you feel helpless. Tapos nanginginig ka minsan, nakakainis, nakakagalit, naiiyak ka na lang. I went to Pag-asa Island last year. You know, kami po, pag sumasakay kami ng barko, we've been eating canned goods and, preserved foods for a few weeks. Siguro sa mga nagsiman dito, nasa barko, alam niyo yan. Pagdating namin doon, may isang mangingisda na pumunta sa bangka namin and then they asked. Sabi niya, sir, gusto niyo ng bag ng do you want some fresh fish? Siya, sure, kasi di ba? Gitna ng dagat, masarap yung fresh na pagkain. And then he brought this entire banyera of lapu-lapu. Pero ano yung nakakalungkot? The lapu-lapus were not bigger than the palm of my hands. Sabi ko, ba't po aliliit ng lapu-lapu? Sabi ng mangis na, wala na kami nahuhuling malalaking lapu-lapu dito for almost a few years na. Then he asked me the question, sir, bakit po kaya? Ang hirap. I can't give the answer. But you know that there's a person who might actually get, who will go hungry if the same thing continues. Sabi ng Malacanang in 2016 or 2015, hayaan natin yung West Philippine Sea kasi wala naman tayo nakukuha dyan eh. Sabi ng BIFAR in 2018, we're only getting 2% of our captured fisheries. 2% lang naman daw ang contribution ng WPS eh. Sino bang magugutom doon? 2% lang naman. The scientists came up with the data. And we argued, we stood on our ground. 2.7 million Filipinos are being fed by what we are getting from the West Philippine Sea. That's actually tantamount to around 25 to 27% of the inter-capture fisheries. Papabayaan ba natin yung 2.7 million Filipinos? Saying no to our fight to the West Philippine Sea is saying no to the livelihood of that 2.7 million Filipinos. Hindi dahil hindi tayo apektado, hindi ibig sabihin wala tayong pakialam. Malayo ang West Philippine Sea pero kadugtong po ng bawat pitukan ng Pilipino yung issue ng West Philippine Sea. We need to actually be reminded of that. The West Philippine Sea, because it's very diverse, actually is the second most important fishing grounds of the Philippines. Ano yung first? Sino mga taga Bicol dito? Yan. Bicol Shelf. Mataas ang fisheries production ng Bicol Shelf. May Philippine rice, di ba? Benhambang, naririnig natin yan. Isabela, kasama yan. Hanggang doon sa Cagayan. Ang pangalawa sa pinaka-productive, West Philippine Sea. Bakit kaya productive ang West Philippine Sea? Kasi in the West Philippine Sea, you will find the longest chain of corals in the world. Ang daming corals. Bakit importante ang corals? Oy, Bio 101. Bakit importante ang corals?
For the breeding of the fishes and other creatures in the water.
Yes, may 5-star ka, ma'am. Because that's basically where corals are. Life thrives. There are no corals, there's no home. There's no home, there's no fish. There's no fish, there's no food. But where you find corals, you find life. And where you find life, economic activity also thrives. And the West Philippine Sea is very important. Ngayon, sabi na naman ng mga nasa taas, naku, malayo naman yan eh, hindi yan productive. As scientists, this is what we do. We need to come up with data, values, and evidence to show our policymakers and decision makers that, no, you're wrong. Example po is Ayungin Shoal. Sino nakarinig ng Ayungin Shoal? Sino pa? Wala na? Yan. Di ba? Lagi na narinig sa news. Hindi yung tuyo. Ha? Hindi yung tuyo. Shoal po, shoal. Hindi yung isda, no? Sabi niya, supply ship ng Pilipinas, sinarang ng China. We have one post there. And that's the reason why the Ayungin Shoal is a flashpoint, no? Now, Ayungin Shoal, ang layo-layo niya, bakit natin siya pinoprotektahan and how we Filipinos actually benefit from it, even if you are not in Ayungin Shoal. This is the satellite image of Ayungin Shoal. Ito po, ito yung corals, no? Ito yung shoal. These are the corals. Andito yung barko natin, yung BRP Sierra Madre. It's a very, very small. It's a big ship, but relative to the entire show, it's very small. Ngayon, yung nasa kanan po na nakikita nyo, the outer waters are blue. Ibig sabihin, walang phytoplankton. O ano yung phytoplankton?
Fish food.
The food of the fish. The more phytoplankton, the more food for the fish, the more fish. Where do you find more phytoplankton? Inside the shoal. So what happens is that the shoals or the corals, including the ayungin, is becoming the breeding ground. Alam niyo po, I went there in 2021. Winabol kami, pero okay lang, nakapasok naman kami. The first time I've seen it, ang mga isda po dun ganito kalalaki. The corals are so preserved. Why? Because no one goes there. Takot eh. Pero, it has become a de facto marine protected area. And where it is protected, you also have more fish. And if there's more fish, there's more food. Eh sabi nila, malayo naman yung ayungin, paano tayo nakikinabang? Because the fish don't stay in ayungin. At one stage of their lives, tulad din natin, we settle somewhere else. Diba? We look for greener pastures. Or because we're so adventurous, we go out of our homes. And that's what happens. The fish that go out of ayungin are the ones now being caught by fisher folks, by fishermen. So as long as ayungin thrives, we will be able to expect more fish. What will happen then if ayungin shoal disappears? News and a lot of reports actually showed that the incursion in the West Philippine Sea actually pushes fisher folk or Filipino fisher folk deeper into poverty because we're cutting the access to the area. Pakita ko lang po sa inyo, no? Sabi kanina ni Dr. J, we classify our waters as territorial, ito yung 12 kilometers, contiguous, ito yung 24 kilometers, or 24 nautical miles, and then the exclusive economic zone as 200 nautical miles. The territorial is more of the municipal waters. Yung mga maliliit po nating mangingisda, dyan sila nangingisda. Kasi una, there are a lot of fish in the coast. Second, it's safe for them because they don't need to go far. Ngayon po, the problem is that, for example, in a 1 by 1 kilometer area, you find a lot of fish, probably 10 fish per 1 by 1 kilometer. This is just a metaphor. If you have 10 by 10, you find 100 fishes. You stay on the coast. However, the West Philippine Sea, or the majority of the EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone, it has smaller number of fish, but you have larger area. If you have access to that larger area, you will be able to get more fish. But the key there is access. You need to be able to go there. You need to be able to fish there. Eh kung hindi ka pinapapasok, what will you get? And that's what's happening with our fisher folks. They are now concentrated on the municipal waters on the coast. They cannot go out, and we have a lot of fisher folks. So they compete with each other rather than accessing what is fundamentally and rightfully theirs. So why should countries, or why should other countries be involved? Pinag-uusapan lang naman pala natin mga mangingisdang Pilipino. Anong pakialam ngayon ng iba't mga bansa dyan sa Southeast Asia at anong pakialam ng Canada? You know? Because we cannot compartmentalize the oceans. We always say that fishes do not have passport. And therefore, no, di ba? Hindi naman yung mga isda galing sa Thailand, pagpasok ng Pilipinas, sabihin nila, check po kami sa consular office. Ewan kung may consulate general tayo sa West Philippine Sea. No. For them, the entire ocean is their playground. Ngayon, why is this important? Because there is this concept of ecological connectivity. The reefs are harboring and hosting some fish. Those fish would lay their eggs there. However, the eggs of the fish do not stay in the same reef. They don't swim, therefore, they float and they get transported by the current. As they get transported by the current, again, parang tayo din, they develop. And when they develop, they mature, they need to settle in another reef. So you now have a source. That's what we call the source. This is what where the eggs are coming from are called the source, and where they go and settle and mature and reproduce are called the sink. The source and sink dynamics in the West Philippine Sea, in the larger South China Sea, is very important. This is a model showing you that if you release particles in the middle of the South China Sea, because of the current, the question is, where would they go? So, the redder the color is, the higher the concentration of the eggs. Isipin nyo na lang yung mga particles na yan are the eggs and the larvae of different corals and fish. Where would they go? Saan sila pumupunta? They go actually to the coast of Palawan. Some of them even end up in the coast of China, of Taiwan. Some actually go to the Pacific Ocean. Some go to the south, in the entire coast of the ASEAN region. And as far as Papua New Guinea. Ano ibig sabihin nito? The corals in the middle of the South China Sea are important sources of eggs and larvae of fish and other invertebrates that end up in the different coasts of the region. So basically, we are supplying the corals and the eggs of the fish to the different countries. Now the question is, kill all those corals. What will happen to the sink? It's dead. So that's why West Philippine Sea is important not just for Filipinos, but for the entirety of the region. You know, we have studies to show this, to support this. We're not saying this because we want it. We actually have data to show that there is a strong ecological connectivity happening in the region. Pag po halimbawa habagat, di ba habagat galing sa baba ang hangin, the eggs coming from the Southeast Asian coast drift to the West Philippine Sea, to Kalayaan Island Group, and they settle there. So Kalayaan Island Group is also a sink. But some of the eggs coming from here would settle in the coast of the Philippines, Pangasinan, Palawan, Ilocos, Mindoro, Manila Bay, Zambales, Bataan. Solo ko yung geography. And then therefore, the West Philippine Sea is serving both as a sink and a source. And it's not just the West Philippine Sea. We have data to show that this is happening in the entire South China Sea region. So China is cognizant of this fact. But the question is, why are they continuing the activities that degrade these ecosystems? There have been a lot of challenges. It's not all well in paradise, as we say. Alam na natin that there had been poaching, overfishing, illegal fishing, clam, coral harvesting, that result to habitat change. These are what we call the traditional threats, continuing non-traditional threats. But the problem is that you also now have emerging non-traditional threats. Ano yung mga yun? Water pollution, artificial island building, climate change, illegal marine scientific research activities, plastics pollution. And all of this contribute to the degradation of the ecosystem. A month ago, we released a very important document, and I actually invite you to download this and read this. It's a compendium of the 3 decades of work that we have done in the West Philippine Sea. We call it State of the Coast, West Philippine Sea. And what is alarming about this? Significant changes across metrics and indicators showed decrease or decline in coral cover from 60% to 20%, in some areas even 4%. Decrease in mass and abundance of fish. Decrease in the size of the fish. Decrease in the number of fish that fisher folks actually get. Increase in the number of pollutants. Increase in the number of plastics that we find in the area. So all metrics actually point to the fact that the South China Sea needs help. So before we even talk about territorial disputes, countries might need to go back to the negotiation table and ask themselves, how can we help preserving this environment? And China's activities, why they are special is that all of them actually contribute to the degradation of the environment. Andyan yung poaching, illegal harvesting, yung mga giant clams. I'm sure you've seen the videos. They harvest giant clams. Ang problem po, they're not only harvesting live clams, they're also harvesting fossilized clams. Ano yung fossilized clams? These are dead clams that have died probably hundreds or thousands of years ago. They're buried under the reefs. To get to those clams, you need to kill everything on top of it. And that means killing all the corals on top of it, killing all the organisms on top of it, to actually have access to these fossilized plants. You know, I was in Xiamen, I was also in Hainan. There was this street na ang tawag nila parang seashells store or something. No? Lahat doon, coral, giant clam materials or products. And then I asked them, saan kaya galing itong mga to? And they're very proud to say, from the South China Sea. They don't even deny it. Now, the question is, if we continue decimating the reefs, what will then happen to the ecological connectivity of the region? We will be feeling the after effects of it in a few years. No? Second, they deploy a lot of vessels in the area. Nakikita natin yan. Hundreds and even thousands of militia. Ang problem, they also release their sewage. Under IMO, this is actually allowed to actually release your sewage in the open ocean, with the assumption that after a while, nature will have its own way to recuperate. But there's a big difference between pulse and sustain. Pulse is you just do it once a year. Sustain is you do it every week. Diba? Sa mga kanal nga natin, alam natin yan. If you release your sewage there every day, you will see the difference. And that's what's happening in species. Nasa rubber boat kami, amoy na amoy mo. Kitang-kita mo siya. And imagine we only do go there once in a while. Eh yung mga reef doon, probably every other day naka-encounter nila yung pupo doon sa mga barko. So this actually affect the integrity of the corals. Plastics pollution is becoming a problem. I've been to several islands in the South China Sea, both occupied by the Philippines and other countries. It's the same thing. Piles and piles of plastics ending up in the coast, such as in Pag-asa, Kota, Taiping, Lawak. This is Pag-asa. I want you to have that vision, so that when you go home, you still remember it. That is Pag-asa. Occupied by Filipinos. Pero, you ask the people, there are only around 120 residents in Pag-asa. There's not even a supermarket within Pag-asa. So I can't imagine how much plastics will be coming from those sari-sari stores. You know where do they come from? We did a survey. 90% of the plastics that you find in Pag-asa are foreign. Labels are Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, mainland China. Tawag ko nga dyan as a ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Trash. ASEAN. Yeah. Sabi ko, buti pa yung mga basura, kita-kita na. Yung mga gobyerno ayaw pumalik sa negotiation table. No? But this also shows us that whatever we do on land will always have an effect on an environment somewhere, even if that environment is very far away. Now, this is another problem. Not all plastics that we see in the marine environment do come from land. Studies show that 20% are actually from ocean-based sources. Ano yung ocean-based sources na yun? Mga barko, shipping lines, cruise ships. Dr. Batong Bakal showed earlier that the South China Sea is an important trade route. It's also an important merchant route. But many of them also throw their garbage directly into the ocean. I've been to several reefs. And sometimes, after the dive, we go up, merong sa ulo ko, merong basura, no? May bag ng basura. And when we open those trash bags, some of the trash even have fresh sauce in them. What does it mean? They were just freshly thrown out of the vessels, of the boats. They have not actually stayed that long in the sea. So ibig sabihin, those trash are coming from the boats in the area. The South China Sea is one of the most heavily fished area of the world. At any given point in time, January to December, there are around 60,000 to 160,000 fishing vessels. 160,000 nagsisiksikan sa maliit na dagat ng South China Sea. So this is a map showing you that each dot here is actually a fishing vessel. That's how much fishing vessels are there in the South China Sea. It's swarm. It's actually swarm. So makikita nyo po, no, some of the areas are empty because these are municipal waters that are reserved for the small fisher folks. So itong mga to are commercial fisheries. So any given point in time, this is December, this is February. Magkaibang taon, same scenario, same visuals. Now what's the problem? Many of these vessels are small to medium. So what they do is that they would send small, medium vessels, and then once in a while, a mothership would come to actually collect the catch. But they would leave the smaller vessels behind to continue fishing. And because these vessels are very small, they don't have spaces for garbage. They don't have spaces for sewage. And where would those wastes go? Directly into the ocean. And because of the geopolitical tension, we're having difficulty policing and regulating this practice. Actually, sabi nga nila, smorgasbord for all the illegal activities in the South China Sea. Kasi wala naman nagpupulis eh. Our Coast Guard are busy with someone else. The other countries just don't care, probably. China doesn't care. So illegal and unsustainable practices continue to happen, you know? And because of that geopolitical tension, there's no regulation, there's no monitoring. And as we continue doing this, the environment also continues to deteriorate. We dived in a lot of areas of the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. Ghost fish nets. Yung mga corals po natin, covered yan ng mga nets. Very sad. Sometimes, ayoko na lang mag-dive. Kasi nade-depressed ako. Kasi you would imagine, no? Tayo, parang, ang layo-layo naman ng mga to eh, so probably they're safe, but apparently they're not. But as we see these problems as we see these issues as a problem, tayo naman, we can also look at this as an opportunity. If countries do not like talking about territory, probably they might be interested in talking about environmental protection. Probably they might be interested in talking about how are we going to preserve the corals. So, but protecting the West Philippine Sea entails understanding how the system works and use it as the foundation for interventions. And this is where the work of the scientific community and the scientists actually come in. Doing science and doing the work allows us to understand what resources we have. Where are they? How are they being affected? And therefore, allow us to come up with sustainable management schemes and frameworks on how to preserve those environments. But the limited or lack of understanding of the consequences of what's happening now in the South China Sea actually put the Filipinos in the disadvantage. Why? Because we're already losing a lot. And the sad thing is that we're losing them without even understanding them. Ano ba yung challenges? Sabi, pwede madali lang mag-research eh. So this is another battleground that we are fighting for. Sabi na, mag-research na lang kayo dyan. Wala po tayong barko. China has over 1,000 research vessels. In 2018, Marine Science Institute, which is the Center for Marine Sciences Studies in the Philippines, has 0 vessels. Tapos tatanungin kami ng gobyerno, anong update sa West Malay namin? Hindi nga kami makapunta eh. Ayun po. Sadly, science is not a priority in the Philippines. The country is only spending around 0.02% of GDP for science and research. Funding for expeditions, no? May barko kami, wala kami pang gasolina. Magsagwa na lang kaya kami papunta ng WPS. We also lack expertise. You might be wondering, sino ba ako? Who am I to actually talk about this? Ang bata-bata naman. I always get that, no? I go to Congress, I go to Senate, tapos parang, ikaw yung resource person. May man-ban ka pa, paano kayo maniniwala sa'yo? But that's actually a manifestation of our lack of our expertise. I'm very thankful to Canada for giving me the scholarship to train as an oceanographer, but right now we only have 26 oceanographers doing studies in the 82% territory of the Philippines. We need more. And I think that's where the community can come in. help produce more of us. We'll be able to help the government come up with sustainable decisions for the West Philippine Sea. All of this, I call this as the 4 stages of Chinese aggression. The first thing that they do is occupy and exploit. Padala sila ng militia, iharas sila yung mga Pilipino para hindi pumunta. When it's clear, they go to the second phase, militarize and reclaim. Padala sila ng militar, they would reclaim, they would build artificial islands. Pangatlo, secure and solidify the presence. You know, it's very sad. I've seen videos of Pag-asa from before in the 90s. It's very, very dark. You can even see the Milky Way galaxy. When I went back there in 2018, there's no dark skies in Pag-asa anymore. Why? Because the Subi Reef that is just in front of Pag-asa, an entire city has been built by China. And this is lit 24 hours a day. So you can actually see it as if it's a Manila-based skyline. Ganun siya kalaki. And then they go to the 4th phase. Ano pa yung pwede nila, sorry. Ano pa yung pwede nilang gawin? So they would actually develop and utilize the resources. And this is where studies actually come in, you know. Ngayon, ano yung problem? Illegal MSR allows China to know what's there. And the more they know, the more they can utilize the resources. If they know how to utilize the resources, asan pa yung exclusive economic zone ng Pilipinas? The resources reserved for Filipinos are now being utilized by China because they are investing in research. So this is something that probably many of us do not hear about. Ang lagi nating nakikita, military. Ang lagi nating nakikita, security. But behind all of those are activities that allow them to exploit and make use of those resources. Ano ba yung stake ng China? China understand that the West Philippine Sea is beyond security. It's beyond food. They understand that this is a source of medicine. Right? Antibiotics, painkillers, anti-cancer, anti-TB. You can find all of those therapeutics and drugs in marine biodiversity. Again, balikan ko lang ha, we are the center of marine biodiversity. If we know that, it also means that we can be the center of drug discovery. China understands this. I was invited by China in Hainan in 2000, just last year. They have this one building. They would collect samples in the first floor, do genomics on the second, do proteome characterization on the third. On the 7th floor, may patent na. Then they proceed to clinical trials. That's how fast they are. And that's how, because they appreciate the fact that, guys, this is not just about space. This is also about resources. China, because of this, put up 3 research stations. And what is the role of those research stations? Offshore experimental base by the Chinese Academy of Sciences to solve science and technology problems on the ecological environment, resource utilization, and sustainable development of the South China Sea. So they themselves acknowledge that they're not just after the space as a security area. It is actually a sustainable source of other products for them. So these actually support studies on ecology, geology, environments, materials, marine energy, and they have been systematically doing research and publishing about it. Proud pa nga sila eh. And you know what's bothering me? In these publications, for those academics here, we know how important publications are. They are referring to these areas as Nansha. They don't refer to this as Spratleys. Ano ibig sabihin nito? They are solidifying their claims and their names through scientific literature. Why? Because other countries, when they cite it, they will cite the work of China. And when they cite the work of China, they will cite the name given by China. So the Filipinos, again, are being disadvantaged on this. The scientific work in international publications do not acknowledge the fact that they belong to the Philippines. And therefore, it allows them to assert and document their claims even more. Ano yung problem? The Philippines cannot catch up. Kasi sabi nga sa inyo, wala kaming barko. Nakiki-hitchhike lang kami. And they've started they've started utilizing the resources for antibiotics and therapeutics. I know for a fact that they've already patented several molecules from the environments of the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea as potential new drugs. Alam niyo po, malaking industry ang drugs, hindi drugs pang to, ang medicine. Canada itself has released a new strategy. They call it the Biomanufacturing Life Sciences Strategy. They even invested 49 million Canadian dollars to actually establish the drug discovery network in Canada because they recognize that during the pandemic, nahuli sila. Hindi sila makapag-produce ng vaccine, hindi sila makapag-produce ng bagong gamot, and they wanted to actually resurrect that industry. And the Philippines has a lot to offer on that. Ano pa? China has now developed an open ocean technology for fisheries. Ano ibig sabihin nito? They can now grow their food in the middle of the ocean. You go to China, the coastal environments of China are all polluted. So anong kailangan nila para magkaroon ng aquaculture? They need to go to new waters. And by having access to the waters in the West Philippine Sea, allow them to actually have their own backyard, new backyard, where they can grow their own food. And tapos yan po, they've started seaweed farming. China is one of our biggest clients for seaweeds. Yung mga nagtatanim po ng seaweed sa Mindanao, sa pinapadala yan sa China. But now, they're growing their own seaweeds. If they cut the trade for seaweed with the Philippines, where are we going to bring our products? Sea urchin and other high-value products. Pero, yung implication kasi nito, if they can now live in these islands, because they have sustainable source of food, they can more effectively occupy. Hindi na sila aalis. Alam niyo po yung mga mangingisda natin sa sa pag-asa, tuwing amihan, nagde-depend sila dun sa pamumuhan ng shells. Kasi ang lalaki po talaga ng alon, hindi sila makalabas. So nahihirapan ngayon yung mga mangingisda natin na tumira sa pag-asa. Pero kung ikaw naman may supply ng food, di ba? Wala kang problema. Pero yung Pilipinas, nag-i-struggle tayo. Ito po, no, whenever we go up, these are actually the militia. Imagine nyo na lang, sakay kami ng maliit na rubber boat. Tapos sugod! Ganyan. Bala na. Yes, din ko yata eh. We went to Ayungin in 2021. We were almost surrounded by their Coast Guard. Pero buti na lang, matalino yung mga Pilipino, so matalino yung kapitan namin. Sabi niya, 3:00 ng umaga, sabi niya, Sir, para din yung Chinese Coast Guard. Mababaw yung draft ng barko. Sabi niya, sige, punta tayo sa pinakamababaw. Just after we entered the Union Shoal, dumaan ang Chinese Coast Guard. Kung bumagal-bugal pa kami ng konti, baka kasama kami doon. This is how we do work in the South China Sea. Hindi siya white beach, hindi siya... The reefs are underwater. You know, Filipinos, we have so little, but we do the most out of what we have. Hindi po madali ang work ng scientists. But we're doing very significant work because from what we know, decisions come out of it. And we are not spared by Chinese harassment. Pwede pa audio nito. Gusto ko iparinig sa inyo, whenever we go out, this is what we experience. Winawangwangan po kami niyan. Tapos we're being warned, umalis kayo, this is our territory. Pero kami, chill. Nagpa-picture pa nga kami. Ayan, no? Although we feel helpless, wala naman kaming magawa. We just continue the work that we do, with the hope that everything that we collect will help the Filipino people. Ngayon, there's a new battleground. Sabi natin kanina, ang dami nangyayari sa surface. But there's actually a new battleground. Where? In the deep. Yes, in the deep sea. China already established an entire framework and a grand plan on how to utilize the resources in the deep sea environments. So here, and then, weirdly, China invited me to see that grand plan. Sabi na, they invited me, sabi niya, Dr. Ronda, this is our new submersible. Sabi ko, bakit kaya ako inibitahan ng mga to? These vessels, I don't know, probably you've heard about the Titan, right? This submersible has been to Marianas more than 100 times. Up and down, up and down, up and down. What does it mean? They can actually go to any part of the world and do discoveries, collect samples, and then know where these resources are. I was invited, they even presented to me the grand plan. In the next 10 years, they'd like to go to the deepest parts of the world, not just of China, but the world. And part of that grand plan is to go to the Philippines. Anong technology meron tayo to combat that? None. You might not know, but the Philippines actually has a lot of deep sea environments. Pag sinabi natin deep sea, ibig sabihin baka may gas hydrates, baka may manganese nodules, may nickel nodules, may iron nodules, may biotechnological properties yung mga bacteria that can be exploited for medicine. And one of those environments is the Philippine Trench, the Emden Deep. Sabi ko, okay. Now I know why they invited me. Because of the Emden Deep. Good thing, okay na tayo doon. No? 2021, we were able to at least explore the Emden Deep. So this is part of the expedition that we had in 2021. It's a collaboration between us and the United States. So we rely on partners. That's why important yung pag-establish natin ng connections. May man-ban po sa
And we're about to get about the Philippine Trench for the first time in history by anybody. Anyone. Did you know? 5 meters. Yeah, it's getting there. It is. That is the bottom of the Philippine Trench. This is the deepest part of the Philippine Trench. So we're showing a raw depth of 10,045 meters.
Yeah. What did we find in the Philippine Trench? It's not lifeless. There's actually a lot of organisms. Not just organisms. Wait lang. Pwede papatay ng ilaw, sir. Ayan. Kita niyo yan? Ano yan? No, that's not just, yes. Di ba? At the bottom of the Philippine Trench, woo! Pilipinas! May basura. On the third deepest part of the planet, just within the backyard of the Philippines, lots and lots and lots of plastics. So yes, we're proud that we have the Emden Deep, but we shouldn't be proud that we polluted it. Yes. So, but aside from that, there's also a lot of organisms. That's a deep sea anemone, yung mga yan, para silang lazy. Those anemone actually have bacteria in them that have high antibacterial properties. And if we can exploit that, then we will benefit, no? There's also those, I call them the ipis of the sea. Kasi para silang mga ipis, no? They're scavengers. That's at the bottom. That's 10,000, more than 10,000 meters below. 10,000, baka ninyo ma-imagine, that's even deeper than the Mount Everest if you put it underwater.
Are those cables?
No, these are called, this is an ROV with a video camera in it and a bait. Yeah, so we can document the diversity down there, you know. Sorry, meron pa pala doon.
Very honored to be part of this trip, and sa mga Pilipino, ito po ang Emden Deep, atin ito.
Yeah. Kaya siguro nainis ng China sa akin, in-invite nila ako. Kasi we've already planted our flag there. China actually wanted, that was the first time that the Emden Deep was visited by any human being. And China wanted to have the record to be the first.
But you beat them.
But we beat them. So, yes. So I just would like to give this moment, no, the Philippines has so much contributions, and one of those contributions are seafarers. The boat that we've used were manned by Filipinos. We're everywhere. No? Kaya kataong dagat tayo right? But what can we do? We're now doing multilateral cooperation. We're enjoining other countries such as Vietnam to help us in the fight, with the understanding that whatever victory we have in the West Philippine Sea will not just be for the Philippines, but it's going to be for the world. Dahan ko lang to. So part of this plan is to... Sabi natin kanina wala tayong barko, meron na po tayong 4 ngayon. Yes. And what does it mean? It's also an opportunity for young Filipino researchers to actually train themselves to become oceanographers, to become marine scientists, and contribute more to the understanding of the West Philippine Sea. Ano yung problema? May barko tayo, wala tayong panggasolina. Totoo yun. That's true. That's why we are seeking support from the different government agencies and even private partners to help fund the research, to help fund the activities. It is a grand plan of the government led by the UP Marine Science Institute, a long-term sustainability plan until 2035. We've been to different parts of the Philippines. We've trained, meron na po tayong research station sa Pag-asa. We call it the Pag-asa Island Research Station. What we want is actually a connection with the other research stations in the South China Sea. So we can have a science diplomacy program where we talk about science and conservation without prejudice to territorial dispute. There's a model for this, and that's why Canada is an important partner, the Arctic. The Arctic works in the same way, and we're trying to learn from Canada on how we can have this model. We've been training a lot of manpower. Kasi may barko nga tayo, wala namang sasakay. Di ba? Ang problema yan. Imagine po, I'm also managing the vessels. So minsan sabi, multo na lang papasakay ko dito. So we've been trying to develop marine science program in the different universities in the Philippines, in all of the regions of the country. So baka yung iba po sa inyo, I hope the new generation of Filipinos would also be encouraged, would be inspired to become scientists themselves. And this is for the Alumni Association of UP. UP just announced that it will be establishing a new university, a virtual university, which will be called Archipelagic and Ocean Virtual University, AUVU. Why is this important? It will integrate, synthesize, collate all efforts of the university related to marine and maritime space so that we can actually help the government come up with a grand plan and implement that plan to maximize blue economy, to maximize our maritime space, and also to help protect the sovereignty and sovereign rights of the country. And why is this important? Because the Alumni Association can actually help with this. No? It's a new program. Ang daming pwedeng entry points. Support for the manpower, support for the expertise, support for the exchange program, support for the fora, webinars, seminars, conferences, whatever. We talk about and amplify the voice of the archipelagic and maritime country. So even if you're very, very far away from the Philippines, you have so many ways on how you can contribute the Philippines fight for its sovereign rights and sovereignty. And at the end of the day, it's really a network of people. That's why I'm very happy to be invited here. Because it's the people working together. It's human-to-human interaction that sustains the effort.
The supermarket. Many of the major fleets in distant water fishing are Chinese and Taiwanese. Many of the crew members, though, are Filipino and Indonesian. And one of the reasons that talking to some of those crew members as part of this more recent project that we've been doing, one of the reasons they're going into this work on distant water fishing vessels, which is terrible work. It's dangerous, it's exploitative, it's sometimes deadly. One of the reasons they're going into it is precisely because the coastal ecosystem that they were dependent on in the Western Visayas, in Palawan, in other regions of the Philippines, has been degraded to the extent that migration is the only recourse that they have. It's the only possibility to put food on the table in their households. So, that connected ecology, that connected human ecology goes goes even further. I had just two other thoughts that I wanted that were stimulated by Dr. Onda's presentation. One is the mention of Canada's Arctic as a possible model of resort, and it's not perfect, that's for sure, but a model that could be used in terms of common stewardship of a globally important resource. One of the things that is important in the Canadian engagement with the Arctic is other forms of knowledge, non-scientific forms of knowledge, indigenous knowledge in the north, and particularly amongst Inuit communities.